The dog had been barking for hours, its cries cutting through the stillness of the neighborhood. It wasn't the usual barking, though. There was something frantic, desperate in its tone. A few early risers peered out from their windows, but no one stepped outside. The dog's movements were erratic, pacing back and forth in front of a small, crumbling house. Its eyes were wide, full of confusion and anxiety, but no one understood the urgency behind its barks. The wall in front of the dog stood silent, unyielding to its pleas. Neighbors shook their heads, muttering about the noise, but dismissed it as a dog just being a dog. The world moved on, oblivious. But the dog, still on guard, barked louder, as though trying to tell them something. There was a hint of something darker, something that no one could yet see. Its barks began to echo, reverberating off the old, cracked bricks of the wall. What was it trying to reach? What was hidden within? No one knew yet, but the tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The morning stretched on, but the dog's relentless barking didn't waver. More neighbors started to stir, pulling back their blinds, casting curious glances. But even with the growing noise, no one seemed ready to act. Some muttered under their breath, annoyed by the disturbance. Others fumbled with their phones to capture the strange spectacle. The dog's frantic movements didn't cease, its body now pressing against the wall, as if it could will the bricks to reveal their secret. Each bark seemed to grow more desperate, more urgent. Yet, there was a disconnect. People watched, but they didn't understand. The dog's behavior had moved past the realm of curiosity. It was a cry for help. The dog was communicating, but no one was listening. The wall, cold and unmoving, seemed to mock the dog's helplessness. A deep sense of discomfort started to rise in the air. What was hidden inside? What was it trying to tell them? Minutes turned into hours, and the dog didn't stop. Its movements were more frantic now, its paws scraping against the bricks, leaving marks on the weathered surface. A young woman stepped outside, drawn by the noise. She hesitated, glancing around, unsure of what to do. The dog's barking seemed to fill the street, reverberating in her chest. She walked closer, crouching down, her face a mask of uncertainty. She watched the dog's eyes that seemed full of knowledge and pain. Still, she couldn't understand. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered under her breath. She reached out, placing a hand gently on the dog's back. It flinched, pulling away, as if the touch wasn't enough to alleviate its torment. And so, the barking continued, louder now, as if trying to break through the silence that suffocated the street. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and the woman couldn't help but feel it. Despite the woman's attempt to comfort the dog, nothing changed. The barking didn't stop. It only seemed to grow more insistent. As the dog circled the wall once more, another neighbor approached, a middle-aged man with a frown on his face. He was used to the occasional stray dog, but this was different. He tried to call the dog over, his voice firm yet kind. But the dog didn't listen. It couldn't. The man, frustrated, glanced at the wall. He knew there was nothing there, just a solid, empty structure. "What's the matter with this dog?" he muttered, shaking his head. Yet, as the dog continued to bark and scratch, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a strange, unsettling energy in the air, as if the dog's cries were begging for something more than just attention. But no one could see what was hidden beneath the surface. The day passed slowly, the dog's incessant barking now, a constant background noise to the quiet street. No one knew what to do. The dog's cries were too much to ignore, but too confusing to act on. People began to shut their windows again, returning to their routines, as if the noise didn't matter. But the dog didn't stop. It never stopped. Its barking became almost rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat that matched the pace of the neighborhood. And for those who still listened, the question lingered in the air. What was this dog trying to say? The sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the street, but the wall, the dog and the unanswered cries remained. It felt as if time itself had frozen, the world moving forward, while the dog and its secret stayed locked in place. Everyone around it had their own lives to live, But for the dog, the struggle was far from over. The wall remained untouched, its secret still hidden. The dog's story begins before the wall, before the endless barking. It was once a beloved companion, a joyful creature bounding with energy and love. The dog had a family, a small home, a warm bed, and a steady hand to feed it. It would chase after sticks, leap through puddles, and sleep at the feet of its owners, content in its loyalty. The dog was happy. There was nothing to worry about. But everything changed one day, when the family disappeared without a word. Days turned into weeks, and still the door remained shut. No one came. The food bowl stayed empty. The bed remained cold. The dog, loyal to the end, waited. It lay by the door, eyes constantly trained on the threshold, ears perked for the sound of footsteps. But nothing came. Nothing except the passing of time and the silence. But then, the day came when the door stayed shut longer than ever before. The dog, initially patient, began to grow confused. Each day it waited, its eyes fixed on the door, then back at the empty food bowl. The house, once full of life, now felt quiet, barren. The absence of its family was a physical ache in the dog's chest. It would pace from one corner to another, whining softly. And yet, it never left the door. It stayed. Even when the room began to grow cold, the dog remained by the door, in a state of eternal anticipation. It didn't understand what had happened. It didn't know why it was left behind. But its loyalty didn't waver, and so, it waited. For days it waited. The waiting grew unbearable. Hunger gnawed at the dog's stomach, but it couldn't leave the door. There was no food in sight, and yet the dog didn't seek it. It didn't even venture outside. It had been conditioned by love and routine to wait for the sound of the family's footsteps, the sound of the door unlocking. It had learned that waiting was the right thing to do. As the days passed, it grew weaker. The once shiny coat became matted, its ribs showing beneath its fur. The walls of the house seemed to close in, but the dog didn't move. It refused to leave its post. The house was quiet, too quiet now. All it could hear was the ticking of the clock, the passing of time. But still, the dog held on, its loyalty an unwavering force that kept it rooted in place. It was a sad, heartbreaking kind of loyalty, one that no longer served its purpose, but was all the dog had. Then one morning, the dog heard something. A sound. A faint noise. It couldn't quite place it, but it stirred something deep inside. It stood up, its ears perked, body tense. There was hope in its movements. Could it be? The dog's tail wagged slightly, but it was cautious. The noise grew louder, and the dog's heart raced. It darted to the door, placing its paws against it. It barked, as if trying to force the door open with the sound of its voice. But the door stayed locked. The noise continued, but the dog's family still didn't return. And with each bark, the silence grew thicker. The dog didn't understand. The door remained locked, and all it could do was bark into the nothingness, hoping someone would hear. The dog's cries grew louder, more insistent. Yet no one came. It could feel the emptiness of the house pressing in on it. It barked at the door, scratched at it, pawing at the surface as if trying to uncover whatever lay hidden behind it. The pain of the loneliness had set in deep. There was no reason for this. There was no explanation for the family's absence. But the dog's loyalty never faltered. It still waited, still cried out, still searched for a way to reach the people it loved. The world outside moved on, oblivious, while the dog's pain deepened. The house was no longer a home, it had become a prison. The dog had become a prisoner of its own devotion, its loyalty, a curse that chained it to a memory. As the days stretched into weeks, the dog's situation grew worse. The house, once full of life and love, was now nothing more than a cold, empty shell. The family's absence was a cruel void, and the dog began to understand that it might never see them again. Hunger gnawed at it, but it couldn't bring itself to leave the door. Neighbors had noticed the dog's persistent barking, but no one cared enough to step in. Some muttered about it being just a stray, others complained about the noise. No one bothered to investigate further, as if the dog's suffering was a mere inconvenience in their daily lives. It was as if the dog had become invisible, its cries just part of the background noise in a world too busy to care. And still, the dog waited. Its loyalty was unwavering, even as it was met with indifference and cruelty from those around it. The longer it waited, the more the cruelty of abandonment settled into its bones. One morning, the sound of the dog's barking was more urgent, desperate. A neighbor, annoyed by the noise, finally decided to investigate. She stood in front of the gate, arms crossed, staring at the dog with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "What's your problem?" she muttered to herself. The dog's bark softened for a moment as it noticed her, but it didn't stop. She shook her head, thinking it was just a nuisance. With a final glance, she turned away, walking back to her house. The dog, still watching her, gave another hopeless bark. It felt the weight of the cruelty in the moment. The world had turned its back on it. The dog didn't understand why it was left alone in this world, but it felt the sting of abandonment with every glance from those who passed by. The cruelty wasn't just in being left behind, it was in the indifference of those who should have cared. Days passed, and the dog's desperation grew. Its once pristine coat was now matted and dirty, its eyes sunken from hunger and exhaustion. Yet, it still waited. Its cries echoed in the silence of the street, but no one came. As if in a twisted response to the dog's endless vigil, the world seemed to turn further away. It was as though its very presence was a nuisance. The barking had become louder, more frantic, as though the dog was trying to scream into the void, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear. But the street remained indifferent. Neighbors shook their heads, muttered complaints, and returned to their daily routines. The cruelty wasn't just the abandonment, it was the constant, unacknowledged suffering of the dog. The longer it waited, the more it realized the cruel truth. No one was coming to help. Late one afternoon, a passing car slows down, and a man glances out the window, his gaze falling on the dog. For a moment, there's a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he doesn't stop. He drives away, leaving the dog behind. The briefest moment of connection passes, but it's not enough to change anything. The dog doesn't understand why people can see it but choose to walk away. It had been left to fend for itself, unseen by most, a forgotten creature in the midst of a world too busy to care. The cruelty of the situation wasn't just in the abandonment, it was in the deliberate ignorance of its suffering. The man could have stopped, could have helped, but he didn't. And so the dog remained, isolated, its world shrinking to nothing but the cold, unfeeling wall in front of it. The days blend into one another, each one indistinguishable from the last. The dog's cries become weaker, its bark quieter, but still, it doesn't stop. It had become a fixture in the neighborhood, an unacknowledged presence, a shadow in the corner of everyone's consciousness. Some neighbors started to talk about calling animal control, but the discussion was always quickly dismissed. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't important. The dog wasn't a priority. Its pain wasn't real enough to act on. And so the cruelty of indifference continued. The dog remained in its prison of loyalty and loneliness, waiting for a family that would never return, barking at a wall that would never answer. A firefighter, called in by a concerned neighbor, arrived to investigate the dog's unusual behavior. The dog barked relentlessly at the wall, its eyes filled with desperation. The firefighter squatted, trying to understand. Something was off. This wasn't just a stray. The dog's behavior wasn't random. It was trying to tell them something. The firefighter looked at the wall, and then back at the dog, sensing that there was more to this situation than a mere nuisance. The firefighter called for backup, feeling the need for a closer investigation. More firefighters arrived, and one noticed how the dog's anxiety intensified. They began inspecting the wall, tapping it gently. A hollow sound echoed back. The dog's barking grew louder, more frantic, urging them forward. Something was hidden behind the wall, and the dog had been trying to lead them to it. With tools in hand, the the firefighters started to break through the wall. The dog stood back, barking furiously as if pushing them to act faster. When the wall cracked open, a strange smell filled the air. One firefighter's flashlight revealed something unexpected. A small child's item buried in the rubble. The dog's frantic barks told them the truth before they could fully comprehend it. What they were about to uncover wasn't just a mystery, it was something far more chilling. As more of the wall was cleared, the firefighters uncovered more disturbing evidence, layers of dust, and hidden objects. One firefighter unearthed a child's shirt, and the dog's barks intensified. It was clear now, the dog had been guarding a secret, trying to reveal something no one had noticed. The firefighters exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't prepared for this. The situation had escalated from a simple animal disturbance to something much darker. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. The dog had known all along. It wasn't just protecting the house. It was trying to unearth something buried deep within. The hidden objects revealed something far darker. The firefighters understood now. They had to continue the search, dig deeper. The dog had led them to this moment, and they couldn't stop until the truth was fully uncovered. The firefighters stood in stunned silence as they continued to clear the debris. The discovery of the child's clothing was the first clue in unraveling a horrifying truth. As they unearthed more items, it became clear that this wasn't just a simple abandoned house. The dog had been guarding these remnants, pieces of a story no one had known. They had found a child's blanket, shoes, and other personal belongings hidden behind the wall. The dog's bark suddenly made sense. It had been guarding a secret, one that had been buried long before the dog had ever been left behind. It was almost as if the dog had been waiting for someone to finally notice, to see what it had been desperately trying to reveal. The past was beginning to surface, and the truth was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The dog wasn't just waiting for its owners to return, it was waiting for justice. As the investigation continued, the firefighters discovered more hidden compartments within the house, each containing pieces of the child's life. With each new revelation, they began to piece together a dark history. The items told a story of a child who had once lived here, but had vanished without a trace. The dog's behavior now seemed more like a defense mechanism, guarding something that had been hidden from the world. I swear. There was no question that the family had left abruptly, but the dog's loyalty had kept it tied to this place. It was as if the dog was still trying to protect the memory of the child whose absence haunted every inch of the house. The more the firefighters uncovered, the clearer it became. The dog had been protecting the truth about a tragedy long buried. The investigators began piecing together the history of the family who had lived here. As they dug deeper, a disturbing picture emerged. The family had been well known in the community, but they had vanished overnight, leaving behind their possessions and the dog. No one had ever questioned their sudden disappearance, and the police investigation had quickly turned cold. But now, with the child's belongings uncovered, a new investigation was about to begin. The firefighters, now aware of the gravity of what they had uncovered, contacted the authorities, who began to piece together the story of a child who had disappeared without a trace. The dog had been the only witness to the truth. It wasn't just protecting the house, it was protecting a memory that had been kept hidden by the family's dark secrets. As the investigation intensified, the firefighters uncovered more information about the family's past. They learned that the family had been hiding secrets, and the child's disappearance was no accident. The truth was darker than anyone had imagined. The family's sudden departure wasn't due to financial troubles or a simple move. It was the result of a tragedy. The child had been abused, and the family had gone to great lengths to cover it up. The dog had been the only one to witness the abuse, and its loyalty had kept it trapped in this house, guarding the memory of a child who had suffered in silence. The twists were coming faster now. Each new discovery revealed more about the family's dark past. The dog, though abandoned, had never given up on the child it had once loved. It had been protecting the truth all along. With each new detail that emerged, the story of the missing child began to unfold. The truth about the family's involvement in the child's disappearance was coming to light. The dog had been its silent protector, guarding the memory of a child who had been silenced long ago. The authorities were now involved, and the dog's role as the key to this mystery became undeniable. As the police began to gather evidence, the dog's bark seemed to carry more weight than ever. It had led them to the truth. It had waited for years, guarding not just a house, but the memory of the child it had loved. The pain of the past was finally being acknowledged, and justice was on the horizon. The dog had been the silent witness all along, and now it was time for the truth to be heard. The investigation was no longer just a case of a missing child, it was a full-blown criminal case. As the police pieced together the evidence, the shocking truth came to light. The family had been involved in the child's abuse and subsequent disappearance. The authorities began their search for the parents who had disappeared along with the child. The dog's barking, which had once been ignored, now took on a profound significance. It had been the only witness to what happened, the only one who had seen the truth. The dog's barks were no longer just desperate calls, they were a call for justice. The firefighters, having been drawn into this darker side of the story, watched as the police began to track down the missing family. The dog, still standing guard at the side of the wall, seemed to know that the end of the mystery was near. It had led them to this point. Now there was no turning back. As the police closed in on the family's whereabouts, the tension mounted. The dog had brought them to this moment, but the real test was still ahead. The dog's loyalty was no longer in question. It had been unwavering. But would the truth be enough to bring justice to the child it had protected for so long? As the authorities began to confront the parents, the dog's barking became less frantic, more resolute. It knew that something was about to happen, something it had been waiting for years. But as the parents were brought in for questioning, the fear set in. Would they admit to their crimes? Would they face justice for what they had done? The dog had waited for so long, but now, the final confrontation was upon them. The air was thick with anticipation. The police confrontation was tense. The parents, now under arrest, denied everything at first. They refused to acknowledge the truth, to admit what they had done. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the pressure mounted. Finally, the truth began to emerge. The dog's loyalty had uncovered a dark past, and now justice would be served. The child's story was finally told, but the emotional cost was high. The dog had done its part, no longer just a guard of memories, but a witness to the pain of the past. The family's guilt was undeniable, and the emotional impact was staggering. The dog, however, seemed unfazed by the unfolding chaos. Its role was clear. It had protected the child's memory, and now, the fight for justice had reached its conclusion. But the cost of truth was not just emotional. It was life-altering for everyone involved. As the parents were taken away, the dog stood in silence, its eyes following them until they were out of sight. It had waited for this moment for so long, and now there was a sense of finality in the air. The child's memory had been vindicated, and the dog had played its part in bringing that truth to light. But even as justice was served, there was an undeniable sadness in the air. The dog had suffered, alone and abandoned, but it had never given up on the truth. The community, once unaware of the pain that had been concealed, now knew what had happened. But nothing would ever undo the scars left behind. As the police drove away, the dog remained by the wall, watching them go. There was nothing more to do now, except to heal. And yet, the dog's gaze stayed fixed on the road, as if waiting for something more. In the days that followed, the dog was no longer alone. It was taken in by a family who had heard its story, its long vigil, its loyalty, and its courage in protecting the memory of the child. But even as the dog settled into its new home, there was a part of it that would always remain attached to the wall, to the past, to the child it had once guarded. The dog had fulfilled its purpose, but it would never forget what it had been through. The memories, the pain would remain with it, but the silence was finally broken. Justice had been served, and the dog's role as a protector was complete. It had waited, it had barked, and it had never stopped loving. Weeks after the investigation concluded, the town was left in the shadow of what had been uncovered. The child's memory, once silenced, was now honored, and the parents faced the consequences of their actions. The community had been shaken, but there was an undeniable sense of justice in the air. The dog, once a silent witness, had become a symbol of loyalty and the unwavering fight for truth. As it lay in its new home, a soft bed beneath it, it no longer had to wait in silence. It was surrounded by love, something it had never known in its years of waiting at the wall. But despite the warmth, there was a quiet sadness in the dog's eyes. The scars of the past, though unseen, would never fully heal. The dog had given everything to protect the child, and in doing so, it had found its own peace. But there was no forgetting what had happened here. The dog's new family had made it part of their lives, showing it affection and care, but the dog's heart carried the weight of its past. There were days when it would stand by the window, staring out at the street, its gaze distant and solemn. It was almost as if the dog was waiting for something, or someone, though it wasn't clear what. It had spent so long waiting for its family, and now, though it had found safety, a part of it remained tied to the past. The family understood this. They gave the dog space, letting it adjust in its own way, but always offering comfort. There would be no more barking at the wall, no more waiting in vain, but the dog's eyes told a story of loss and resilience. It was slowly learning to trust again, to feel safe, but the echoes of its past would forever linger. Time passed, and the dog settled more comfortably into its new life. The family took it on walks, gave it toys, and treated it with the love it had long been denied. The dog's coat began to shine again, its muscles filled out, and its eyes, though still haunted, began to sparkle with a new sense of joy. But there were moments when the dog would pause, looking out into the distance, its ears twitching at sounds only it seemed to hear. It was as if it could still feel the child's presence, still guarding the memory of someone who had been forgotten by the world. The family, knowing this, quietly respected those moments, giving the dog time to reflect on its past, but always reassuring it that it was home now. The dog had been through so much, and though the scars would never fully heal, it could find comfort in the love that surrounded it. One evening, as the dog lay on its bed, the family gathered around it, offering soft words of comfort. The child, now a part of the town's history, was not forgotten. The dog's presence had ensured that. It had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the strength to endure even in the face of heartbreak. The dog, though still deeply affected by the years of abandonment and betrayal, was no longer alone. The loyalty it had shown was returned tenfold by those who had taken it in. The family sat in silence for a moment, understanding the depth of what the dog had been through. There was no rushing the healing, no timeline for recovery, but the dog had a home now, a place where it was loved and needed. It had fought for the truth, and in the end, it found peace. Despite all that had happened, the dog never fully let go of the past. It still sat by the window sometimes, staring out into the street, lost in thought. But it no longer waited for its old family to return. It understood now. It had given everything to protect the child, and in return, it had been given a new chance at life. The dog's journey was one of sorrow and healing, a cycle that would never fully end. But in the quiet moments, when it rested its head on its new family's lap, there was a sense of peace. The dog had learned that sometimes home wasn't where you had been, it was where you found love, understanding, and the promise of a new beginning. It was finally free.